Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you're well. Today is Wednesday, and it is the 19th of February, and we are getting ready for Shabbos Parshas Mishpatim. And I want to share some items that I hope will enrich your understanding of the Parsha. I want to start by saying that today's Parsha Shir has been generously sponsored by Elaine Whitty, and this is in commemoration of the yahrzeit of her dear mother, Mrs. Rachel J. Whitty. Her Hebrew name was Rachel Gittel, Bas Rabbi Ephraim, and Sarah, Aleha Shalom. And her yahrzeit was the 20th of Shvat, which was yesterday. The 20th of Shvat was yesterday, Tuesday the 18th. Her neshama should have an aliyah, and we definitely appreciate Elaine thinking of us all the way from New York and using this occasion to sponsor some Torah learning in her mother's memory. So a great big yasher koach to Elaine. Okay, I wanted to share some items with you on the Parsha, and let's jump right in. The Parsha begins, I think you're going to find this very interesting, what we're going to start with today, because I found a connection. So the Parsha begins telling us, Ela mishpatim asher tasim lifneihem. These are the statutes or the ordinances you shall place before them. This is right after Har Sinai. And what do we start with? We begin this whole episode, we begin all of these instruction with the laws of Eved Ivri, the Jewish indentured servant. It says, Kisikna Eved Ivri, if someone enters into this contractual agreement with an Eved Ivri, with a Jewish indentured service, excuse me, Sheish Shanim Yavod, he's allowed to work for 6 years, Uvashvi'is, and in the 7th year, Yetzeh Lachav Shechinam. That's the Shemitah year, that's when he goes out free. And then we'll talk about the dinim. What if he wants to stay? He gets his ears pierced, and then he can stay until the Yovel, until the Jubilee year. Okay. What we're going to take note of is of all of the dinim that can be discussed that we can start the conversation with in Parshas Mishpatim. It's fascinating that we start with the law of the Eved Ivri, someone dealing with Avdus, this indentured servitude. So let's see what Rav Sorotzkin, Rav Zalman Sorotzkin says, Naim LaTorah. He has such an astute observation, and you'll see who he credits at the end is one of his children. Let's see what he says. Ki sikne Eved Ivri. The Torah begins Parshas Mishpatim with the rules of the Eved Ivri. If someone enters into this contractual agreement with an Eved Ivri, HaTorah maschila es ma'arechas hamishpatim. The Torah begins this entire set of laws, ordinances that we're about to describe, b'mitzvahs Eved Ivri. Of all of the dinim, of all the mitzvahs we could have chosen, why are we starting with Eved Ivri? Umazhira Osanu. I'm sorry, the print isn't 100% clear, but it was like that in the original as well. Umazhira Osanu. The Torah cautions us lihisyaches bechesed uverachamim eloheved ha'ach, that if we are going to engage the services of an Eved Ivri, he's one of us. He's a family member who's fallen on hard times. So if we're going to, how should we relate to him? Bechesed uverachamim. We're going to see that we're dealing with him. All the laws are there, how we have to deal with him with utmost compassion. That we're not allowed to use him for demeaning or very terribly hard slave labor. It's our responsibility to feed him and to give him to drink. Imcha, with me. In other words, whatever my food is, whatever my standard of living is, that's what I have to share with him. And he says, and then the Torah puts limits on how long we could keep him in this status for. He says, if you were to ask me, and you would think about who's the generation we're speaking to, this is a people who's just left servitude. They probably have incredible sensitivity to anyone who is going to find themselves in a position of being an Eved. So this is the last thing I would say that has to be told. This is the last thing Klal Yisrael needs to hear about. All these new masters, meaning Am Yisrael right now, they're the new potential masters. They just left slavery themselves. They just left the terrible crucible of Egypt, where they were in slavery for hundreds of years. Oramu b'saram, on their very flesh and on their skin. Hergishu hetev es hatam shel chaye avdos v'shibud. They were lashed. They still have their scars healing from being beaten by their Egyptian taskmasters. They know what it's like to be treated as a miserable aved. Ubevadai hiskomamu kol hazman b'nafsham. So I would say that they're incredibly sensitive. They would never mistreat an Eved. They know what it's like to be on the receiving end of those lashes. They would never mistreat an Eved. You need to tell them about this so quickly? I can imagine they would protest, say, why are you telling us these dinim? Why does this even enter the mind? That as soon as now we've become free, do you really think that we could turn into cruel masters? That now you have to tell us all these dinim that pertain to how nice we have to treat an Eved Ivri? Do you really think that we would bitterly enslave our own relatives? They're our flesh and blood. You think we would treat them in a terrible way that society would treat a slave? Of course not. What are you saying about us? You can imagine Klal Yisrael being up in arms, protesting. Why are you telling me this right now? Ulam, however, the Torah is far wiser than we are because it's God's instruction manual. And the Torah knows to plumb the depths of the human soul. I'm going to the top of the second column. God wrote about us already at the end of Parshas Noach. God wrote it, and then the Parshas Bereshis, that what does he know about us? God knows about us that all day long we're trying to think about how we can do things that are wrong. Va'eved shalayom, and God knows human psychology is the same person who was a slave today, shekiba mara al shibud, who was treated bitterly and awfully as a slave, v'davar gavoa al shivyon, and now speaks in such lofty terms about equality, v'al achlos amim, and the brotherhood of man. That same person, al tzedek v'yosher, and about how we have to strive for social justice. Misugol dafka lepech. A person like that could turn, he is the person or she is the person, someone who was mistreated terribly. Don't take for granted just because they were treated terribly, they understand how wrong that was, and now they would never treat someone else that bad. The Torah says, no, that is specifically the person who is misugol. They're most hardwired to do the opposite. Even though they were treated bad, they're the one who's most wired to treat others bad. Even on the day after they become free, they could turn into this bitterly wicked slave master, Habaz, who could humiliate their servants, Misnaker lachol ha'adialim, and they would throw away all those idealistic virtues that they had spoken of for years when they were striving for equality and striving for freedom. As soon as they get a position of authority, it's all out the window. Shenilcham avuram esmal, even though they fought for all those rights yesterday, once they're in the driver's seat, they can become the most miserable slave master as possible. Shlomo HaMelech says, Tachas sholosh rig za'aretz. Shlomo HaMelech taught in Mishlei that there are three that the world shakes from, that meaning can do such terrible destruction in this world. And one of them is Tachas Eved ki yimloch. Someone who was a former slave, someone who in an earlier stage in life was a slave and now ended up as a melech. Oh my God, that's someone you got to watch out for. V'divrei hayamim shel ha'amim hashonim lamdim. If you look at the history of nations of the world, we see this lesson play itself out over and over again, that the enslaved, as soon as they break free and they make it into a position of leadership, it's not going to happen that, oh my gosh, they're Rahmanim, or they're so merciful because they understood what it's like. To the contrary, now they're going to say, who can I give it to? He says history has borne this out, has played this out so many times. And therefore the Torah sees that this is such a real fear. Torah, we see that there was for very good reason. He says in our own days we see this. Eich misyachsim avadim. Look at the way slaves treat others. Hapoalim hameduchachim. They were workers who were so mistreated by their masters. Shetasu es hashalton lidim, and now they got into a position of authority. Look how they turned. Are they the most merciful? He's clearly here talking about socialism and communism. He's saying, what was their whole rallying cry? Workers of the world unite. We've been so mistreated, and there's been such wealth concentrated in the hands of the few, and we've been slaving away for them. So you'd think these people would be the most merciful people when they possess authority. But no, the most totalitarian, horrific regimes in world history are those communist and socialist dictatorships. And that's coming from people who have been preaching all these idealistic ideas about the equality of man and workers of the world unite. How does that happen? He says the Torah understands that's human psychology. Let's read a little more. He says, he goes, Shetasu es hashalton leideim. As soon as these former slaves end up in a position of authority, lavdeim achadashim, for their new people that they could now oppress, ubazim lachol divrei hashivyon hatzedek vayosher, all their nice words about equality and social justice, it all goes out the window. I can't even read the next word; it's a little blurry. So he says, "She meluim b'fiyosem." Even though they were always talking about these concepts, lifnei alosam lamalchus, before they became kings, before they rose up to authority, they were preaching all day long about equality, liberty, and all these ideas. It's out the window. L'chein is here Torah b'chol hachomer alzeh. That's why the Torah says we have to make certain that this does not happen to Am Yisrael. V'amidas mitzvos hazos rishona. Therefore, the Torah says the very first mitzvah after the giving of the Torah, when we get into Mishpatim, the very first section of Mishpatim, we're going to spend time on this because we're saying don't fall into this trap. Right after Har Sinai, right after Aseret Adibros, we're going to spend time teaching you've got to be a mensch. Don't fall back into this. It's almost like HaKadosh Baruch Hu realizes we've been damaged. We've been so damaged by those years of shibud, those years of slavery, those years of being oppressed, that it's left scars on us. And what are some of those scars? Besides for everything that we've suffered as slaves, but those scars are that now that we're in a position of authority, we would treat others like trash. What do you mean? We know what it's like to be on the receiving end. It doesn't matter. It all goes out the window. I couldn't help but think, I remember, I'm just going to go ahead to the second page for a second. Here, look at this graphic. I remember once hearing a teacher of mine in yeshiva talk about this. He was saying he once saw a great bumper sticker, and it makes so much sense. Hurt people, hurt people. And there's a cute graphic of this little bully kid, but that's what he's saying. Hurt people, hurt people. Kids who were hurt, who were bullied, they're the ones who are most likely to hurt others. That's, unfortunately, it plays itself out with abuse victims. It plays itself out so often, is that they don't internalize the message, oh, that was so bad. I don't want anyone else to experience that, so I'm going to be the most merciful person in the world. Oftentimes there's such anger, there's such resentment, and the way they deal with it, someone who's been a victim of abuse, a victim of mistreatment, of bullying, is they'll say, okay, that's what I experienced. And now if I'm ever in a position of authority, the way I'll feel good about myself is hurting somebody else. Unfortunately, it makes no sense. It's not logical. It's destructive for all parties involved. But unfortunately, that's just the way human beings are hardwired. And that's what he's saying the Torah is so sensitive to here. The Torah is so sensitive to, here we are, we're a nation of former slaves. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to make sure we don't fall into that trap. And again, this has happened so many times. It's not just communism. It's not just socialism. We look at the French Revolution. They were right away. What happened after they deposed the king? The guillotine comes out, and there's total bloodshed, and it takes so long for things to come out, for calm down, and for society to right in itself again. Unfortunately, this has played itself out so many times in so many places in so many nations, and that's what Sorotzkin here is suggesting. Why the Torah starts Mishpatim, telling us, be a mensch. If you're going to have an Eved Ivri, be a mensch. Don't fall into that trap. Because unfortunately, we've seen the way this plays itself out so many times. It's just the way human beings are hardwired, unless we make a conscious effort to not fall into that trap. Now, look at this last parenthesis in Rav Sorotzkin. That's the left column, the last two lines. This says something. Whenever someone quotes someone else, shares a beautiful Dvar Torah, he could have taken credit for this. He could have said this was mine, and who would have ever thought different? But look what he does in this last paragraph, in this last parentheses, rather. Mipi, this idea that I just shared, I don't want to take credit for it. Mipi b'ni, I got this idea from my son, Harav Agon Reb Elchanan. In other words, Reb Sorotzkin had a son, Reb Elchanan, and he says he was the one who came up with this. And I thought it was so beautiful. I printed it in my sefer. But I want, for honesty, I wanted the world to know this was not my idea. This was my son's. And who is his son? He says, I've based in the Zhlodok. I don't know where that is. Maybe that was a town in either Lithuania or Poland, obviously before the Holocaust. Okay, it's Yerushalayim, and now he is in Yerushalayim. So at one time he was the rabbi of this town of Zhlodok, and now he's in Yerushalayim. So I thought that was very, very fascinating. It's a beautiful Dvar Torah, and then to see something from Sorotzkin, to see how he credits. He says, I want to make it clear, this isn't me, this is my son. Now we're going to take it to the next level. So I've been sharing with you over the last couple of months a sefer that I've been enjoying, the 2 volumes that I have, and it's called Meged Yosef, and it's written by Rabbi Yosef Yehuda Leib Sorotzkin. This Rabbi Yosef Sorotzkin is a grandson of Rav Zalman Sorotzkin. So I've been enjoying his sefer, and all of a sudden I saw on this pasuk, he says something very, very similar to this idea. First, I was saying, wow, this is just like his grandfather. And I realized that it's not his grandfather, it was his uncle. This wasn't his father. In other words, this Rabbi Sorotzkin, this Rabbi Yosef Sorotzkin, is a grandson of Rav Zalman. And Rav Zalman quoted in the Znaim Latori, quoted then, that was his son, I think we said it was Eliezer, was the name? Elchanan, rather. I'm sorry, Rabbi Elchanan. That's not the father of this Rabbi Yosef Sorotzkin. That was his uncle. So you're going to see here, he's going to say a very, very similar idea. And to me, what this makes it sound like is that this Dvar Torah that Rav Sorotzkin put in print in his Aznaim LaTorah, the family must have loved this. And for all you know, they were always talking this over at the Shabbos table. And this Rav Yosef Sorotzkin, who's a grandson of Rav Sorotzkin, he obviously heard this as a youth, and here he is, he says it in his own words. Now, did he hear this from his uncle? Did he hear it from his grandfather? Did he hear it from his own father saying it at the table? I don't know. He doesn't tell us this, but it's so clear as we read this. This was a family. This was a family Dvar Torah that they obviously felt very good about, and they had shared. So let's see how he says over, and you'll see some of the terms he's using are very, very modern terms. And I said as what people who are involved with counseling and people who are involved as therapists, what they'll always say to be on the lookout for is that hurt people hurt people. You'll see how that comes up in these words here. Look at this. We're on page 2. These are the specifics of the very first laws that the Jewish people are told after they've received the luchos, the Aseret Adibros, the 10 Commandments. It's astonishing. They just became free, mishubadim, from their miserable slavery. Akasha, that was so tough. In their memories, it's ingrained in their memories how miserable it is to be treated as unfairly as a slave. They still have scars. They have lashes across their back from what their Egyptian taskmasters did to them. So it's not possible. I would have argued it's not possible that they'd ever be cruel to their own avodim. Look how astonishing it is. Dafka b'dinei eved maschila Torah. This is what the Torah starts with in Mishpatim, about how nice you have to treat your avodim. These are the last people who need to hear this message. This is the same question as what his grandfather asked and what he said over from his uncle. And look how he answers it. Same answer, but with much more modern wording. Look how deep the words of the Torah are. And look how they were written. The Torah was written for the very nature of man, which is no surprise. God created man and God created the Torah. So he gave us the Torah to temper us, to rein us in. It makes total sense that it's made to deal with human nature. Kvar kavu yodei bina. anyone who's got wisdom, he means therapists and anyone who's an astute observer of the world. Everyone understands. Sheben shehuka ba'achzarias al yidei aviv. If you have a child who was beaten miserably by his father, rabu asukuyim, the odds are very great. Shu atzmo yisachzar livno, will beat his son mercilessly. If this child was abused by his father, physically abused, he was just beaten miserably. His dad had a real anger problem and would take it out on his son and beat him. The odds are stacked that this guy's going to do the same to his kids. But why? Logic would have dictated the opposite. This kid realizes how terrible it was the way his father treated him. He would make a pact that he would never treat his own kids that way. Shekiman shechash al bisaro es elbon v'akaev shalakach zaris. Logic would dictate that just he knows how bad it is, so he would have mercy on his kid, not to make him go through that terrible suffering. He would do everything he could to prevent his beloved son from experiencing something of this nature. Lemaros Cain, but in spite of all that, Amitzius Mara, the actual experience of the world, it shows us different. Shekivan shehurgo lachzarius. Once a person has gotten in the habit, has been habituated, has been treated in a cruel fashion, lo b'mehera yuchuli snarimimer. You can't just shake it off. You can't just undo that damage. And that's what we see. It's played itself out in the world history. Shalochmei chofesh, those who fought for freedom. Nismaradu ba'aritz shemashal aleim, and they rebelled against the oppressor who was over them. Eved ki yimloch, when this slave becomes a melech, v'kivan shetavshu es hashalton, as soon as he becomes a ruler, yisachzuru They'll be just as bad. They won't be any better than their predecessors were to their subjects. Therefore, the Torah is very clear to us. Havina, and the Torah understands because it's God's word. Right now is the most opportune time, while it's still fresh in your memory, and you're thinking, yes, this is the way a master treats an Eved. A master is cruel to an Eved. We all have memories of that. So before you become a master, we have to break this. We have to get this cycle broken. We have to get this out of your system. Gedola sakana. Now is the time where it's the greatest danger because you're the ones who have firsthand experience. You'll make the mistakes of thinking that this is the way you're supposed to relate to an Eved. So he says, Gedola sakana, now is the greatest risk. Shem gami sachsru lavdem, that if you become a master because another Jew was poor and had to enter into a state of indentured servitude, then you'll treat him terribly as well. Uke'es, now, exactly right now, tzavasha, this is exactly the right time, lahoros lem, to instruct them, derech haTorah ba'avdus v'chol dinah. This is the way that the Torah envisions the concept of avdus, of servitude, and here are the dinim. These are the ways that you have to treat a person with rachmanos. I thought that was incredible. You could see that this is like, this was something that this must have been a family Divrei Torah, because he's saying this, again, more modern terminology. He's basically talking about how abusers end up, the victims of abuse become abusers. That's what he's saying here. And he's saying this is mamash, it's the same Divrei Torah as his grandfather recorded from his uncle. This is what you see here, and he's just, I think, bringing it more modern terminology, but this is what it is. So this must have been a Divrei Torah that was spoken over on Parshas Mishpatim at the Sorotskin family Shabbos table for many years. That here it is, you could see it's 3 generations of Sorotskins talking about this. You have the grandfather quoting one of his sons, and then a grandchild, saying this over. Clearly, this was something that he got from his father or his grandfather or his uncle. This was something that was spoken about. They felt very strongly about, and it's confirmed. This is something therapists speak about all the time, and we've seen this with our own experiences as well. All right, let's move on. So we're moving now to page 3. I want to share with you a beautiful Divrei Torah here on page 3. So the Torah tells us in 2 prakim later, 2 chapters later, Ki sifka shor oyivcha o chamaro toeh. If I come upon my enemy's bull or a stray donkey, in other words, I've got someone I'm in a feud with. The Gemara discusses what that could be about, but I've got someone that I've been a feud with. He's in the category of my oyivcha. He's my enemy. So I see one of his animals has wandered off. It's basically escaped from the pen, from the corral, and it's going to go off. So what's the halacha? Hashev teshiveno, return it to him. In other words, even though get over it, you've got a problem with this guy. Okay, but in the meantime, he's about to suffer a financial loss because his donkey's going to escape. His bull's going to get away. Before that happens, return it to him. Next pasuk, hey, kisireh chamor sonacha. And again, I've got an enemy. I've got someone that I really don't like. Someone is a sonay. Someone we've got a hatred towards each other. There's a feud. It's like a Hatfield McCoy situation. Kisireh chamor sonacha rovetz tachas maso. And I see that this animal is lying down under a heavy burden. Its master put too much weight on its back. So this donkey has collapsed under this massive burden of bricks or whatever it is it's hauling. V'chadalta me'azov lo. Do you think you should refrain from helping him just because he's your enemy? No, azov tazovimo. Get involved and help him out. I must have mentioned this to you in the past, but one of my best childhood friends, he had his ufraf. It was Parshas Mishpatim. And I'll never get this out of my mind. It's over 30 years ago now. It's over 30 years ago. And I remember davening at his shul. And his shul, the Balkori was a bit of a character. I remember he was an Englishman. He had an English accent. And when he would lane, he would get so into it, he would sometimes almost like act it out, like it was the conversation. Like the trup could have been one thing, but he would act it out. It was really wild to hear him lane Megillas Esther. But I remember even on regular Parshas HaShavua, if I'd ever like be playing with my friends, so I would have stayed over there for Shabbos or whatnot. I remember it was the most wild laning this Englishman did. But here it was, I was at his Ufraf. I must have been like, I don't know, 22, 23 years old. I don't remember exactly how old I was. And I remember him laning, and this is Ravi. This is how Ravi ends. So Ravi ends with this pasuk. So he would lane it, Kisireh chamor, chamor sonacha rovetz tachas maso, and then he would read it like as a question. The chadalto me'azov lo. You think you should get away, turn away, and not get involved? Azov tazovimo. Like he was reading it, like you can imagine this English school teacher wagging his finger at you. It was the wildest thing. I just remember it made such an impression on me. But every year when I get to this, when I'm going over the Parsha and I get to this, it reminds me that this is my friend Zofrov, because I'll never get that out of my head. And that also means he's got an anniversary coming up. So I always send, I'm only in touch a couple times a year. He lives in Israel now. So we're in touch a couple times a year with email, or, every now and then if we're in Israel, we try to see him. But this is one of those occasions. Whenever I get to Ravi and Mishpatim, I send them an email and I send, wow, I'll never forget that lady. This is your Ufraf anniversary, which means you and your wife got an anniversary coming up. Hashem should bench you with many more years of health, happiness, and nachas for the kids. So I sent that email out this week as well. All right, be that as it may. Those are those two psukim at the end of Ravi. So let's see a pasuk in Tehillim, and then we're going to see a little bit more. So there's a pasuk in Tehillim that says as follows. The pasuk says, this is actually a pasuk in Sadi Tes in Tehillim, and we say this Friday nights. It's part of Kabbalah Shabbos. It says, it starts, the paragraph begins, Hashem Malach. So it says, this pasuk says, V'oz Melech Mishpat, and you're the might of the king, Ohevata, Konanta Mesharim. So I'm sorry, V'oz Melech Mishpat Ohevata, and the might of the king who loves judgment, Konanta Mesharim, you founded equity to treat everybody the same, meaning you're not going to show favoritism to one party over the next. Mishpat Utztaka b'Yakov ata asisa. Judgment and righteousness you made in Yaakov. So what does it mean, Ata Konanta Mesharim? You founded equity. So let's see Rashi on Tehillim. And we'll see this. Rashi quotes our pasuk from Parshas Mishpatim. The Rashi says, "Atzok konanta mesharim." You founded equity. Pshara. This means you came up with this idea of compromise. That the best way to get to make shalom is to compromise. If each party remains steadfast and we're not willing to give in, we'll never have shalom. So the best way to get shalom is through compromise. And then he says, furthermore, V'samta shalom bein anashim konanta, and then you've also made peacemaking between persons. You, Hashem, you've built the world in such a fashion that makes peacemaking possible. How? How does Hashem, through his, it sounds like Hashem, through his actions, you make it possible for people to make peace. What does that mean? Ba'amracha, because you instructed us, you gave us one of the mitzvahs, Ki sirech hamor sonacha rovetz tachas masav, that last pasuk in Ravi. You said that if you see your friend's donkey suffering under a weight, I shouldn't turn away, I should help. And the pasuk right before that, you said kisifka shor oyivcha, that you said that if I see my friend, my enemy's bull or his donkey wandering away, I should return it to him. So he says as follows: Mihu sheyires sono gomelo chesed. Put yourself in the other guy's shoes. Let's say you're the person whose donkey was weighing down under the load of bricks, or you're the person whose donkey was wandering off, and now the enemy comes to return it. What is that person now thinking? Me who sheyires sono gomelo chesed. If I see my enemy doing chesed for me, he's returning my donkey that had wandered off. He's helping me with my donkey that was overburdened with bricks. As soon as he sees that, shelo yidveno libo lechavko lenashko. Would such a person, would he be able to hold himself back? Would he not be inspired to embrace him and give him a kiss? Tanchuma, that's the Medrash Tanchuma. We're going to look at that Medrash now. But Rashi's quoting this Medrash. Rashi's telling us is that God, you're so awesome, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because you made a mitzvah. One of your mitzvahs is going to cause shalom. These two psukim at the end of Revi and Mishpatim telling me that I have an obligation. If I see my enemy's donkey wandering off, I have an obligation to return it, to lead it back to the corral. If I see my enemy's donkey weighing under a ton of bricks, I have an obligation to help lighten that load and help it get back up on its feet. By making that mitzvah, you're causing shalom, because when my enemy sees me, that I'm going out of my way to help him, he's just going to feel I can't hold back. He's going to jump forward and give me a hug and give me a kiss. And that's how you bring shalom. By giving us these mitzvahs, you're bringing shalom to the world. That's what Rashi says, and he quoted the Medrash. So let's see the Medrash. It's a Medrash right here at the beginning of Mishpatim. So look, it's on the top line on the right, the bottom of page 3. Mahu ata konanta mesharim. So the Medrash Tanchuma says, what does it mean, Hashem, that you created equity? What does that mean? Amar Reb Alexandri. So Reb Alexandri, he taught as follows: Shnei chamarim mahalchim baderech. You have two people who are leading their donkeys on the road. Sonim zelazeh. And these are people who hate each other for years. They're upset for one reason or another. They've been in this long-lasting feud. Ravatz la'achad me'en chamaro. One of them, the donkey just basically collapses under the weight. It's just too much weight. He can't move forward. Chavero over. His friend is passing by. It's not really his friend. It's his hated enemy. But Chaver means another member of Klal Yisrael. V'roeu sheravatz tachas maso. And he sees Reuven and Shimon. Reuven sees Shimon's donkey. They hate each other. And he sees Shimon's donkey is collapsed under this weight. Amar, he says, how can I just walk away? Loksiv b'Torah, doesn't the Torah say, Kisirech hamor sanacha, that if I see my enemy's donkey collapsed under a weight, I'm not going to help him. I got to get involved. So what does he do even though he hates him? He says, I'm going to help. I'll help you. I'll take some of the weight off. I'll repack it better, and I'll accompany you to make sure your donkey doesn't collapse. Once they're walking already, okay, we're already walking. I'm leading. We may as well have a conversation. It begins pretty begrudgingly, but we may as well have a conversation. Azov kima mikan. So he helps him a little bit because the donkey is faltering. He helps him a little here. Hale mikan. He helps lift a little there. Arok mikan. He takes some load off here. Ad sheyitonimo, until he's totally helping him. Nimtsu osin shalom benem. And in the process of going about all this, they decide, okay, I did hate you, but we're talking. This brought us to conversation, and conversation leads one thing to the next. Okay, let's get over this problem we had. Let's make up. Well, let's be friends again. But Chavero Omer, and the other fellow says, Lo yisi savar shu soni. What's going on? He's helping me. All this time, I thought he hated me. But now look how he took compassion on me. Kisharo, see, when he saw that me, Veschamari, and my donkey, Bedochach, we were in a difficult situation, look how he got involved. Mitoch kach, through this whole episode, nichnesu lepundak, they end up stopping at the next station. It could be an inn, it could be a restaurant, whatever, something along the way. Achlu v'shasu b'yachad. They say, okay, let's sit down, let's have a meal together. V'nisavu zelazeh, and they become friends again. They got over whatever it was that had separated them. This brought them back together. Haveyata, and that's what the pasuk in Tehillim is referring to. That's what it means. Ata konanta mesharim, that you have created equity, mishpat tzedakah, meaning your mitzvahs, Hashem, they're so beautiful because your mitzvahs, when we fulfill your mitzvahs, they bring shalom to the world. That's what we're saying. That's what this Medrash is saying. That's what Rashi was quoting. It's beautiful. A friend of mine, I've quoted him once or twice before, but I want to quote him again because he came out with a volume 2. A friend of mine named Rabbi Shimon Feder, we were classmates in high school and we went through yeshiva together as well. And he works in Jewish outreach work in Florida, South Florida, Boca Raton area. So a couple of years ago, I believe it was 2 years ago, the first volume came out. It was called Psychology and Personal Growth in the Torah. And this year he printed a second volume. And I was looking at it and he had such a beautiful take on this medrash. Let's look at this together. He says the medrash is quite surprising. Since this is an explicit verse in the Torah, one could assume that Shimon also knew of this mitzvah. In other words, both parties know Reuven is stopping. He says, I don't like, if you would ask Reuven, do you like this guy? No. So why are you stopping? Because it's a mitzvah. So Shimon also knows that Reuven's not helping me because he loves me. Reuven's helping me because it's a mitzvah. Wouldn't Shimon assume that Reuven was only motivated to help him because he wanted to fulfill a mitzvah, a Torah obligation? Furthermore, why would Reuven's feelings towards Shimon change if all he did was a Torah mandated obligation? I don't want to be your friend, but the Torah told me I got to do this. Why is anyone going to change? Why is Shimon going to be so shocked and feel different? Why is Reuven going to feel different? How could this bring the two adversaries closer? Both parties know that the only reason to doing this is because God asked me to. It's like sometimes someone asks you to do something. I'm doing this. It's not because I love this person, not because I care about them. This is what I was asked to do. We learn from this midrash an amazing truism about interpersonal relationships. Although Reuven's actions weren't initially motivated by love, acts of kindness, when we do chesed for another person, have the power to change one's internal feelings, both the givers and the receivers. His actions ultimately fostered a stronger connection between two people who were initially so distant from one another. We naturally invest our time and energy in nurturing relationships with close friends, relatives, and those who support us. Rarely do we make the same effort with those we feel disconnected from or dislike, because they're unlikely to bear positive results. However, an act of kindness for another can close the gap and make real change where it wasn't thought possible. May we choose to build better relationships with everyone around us and see amazing results. This is such a beautiful understanding of the Medrash. And until my friend Shimon pointed this out, I never thought of this. It's a great question that he asked. Why should this mitzvah cause any friendship to happen? If you ask Reuven, why are you helping? He's your enemy. He says, I don't want to help him, but Hashem told me to. If you ask Shimon, why is Reuven helping? Doesn't he hate you? He does hate me, but he's doing this because Hashem wanted him to. I would imagine that the whole time they should just be grunting at each other and saying, I hate you, I hate you. The only reason I'm helping is because it's a mitzvah, and they should go their own ways. But the Medrash says that's not going to happen. Why? Because there's something so powerful about chesed. Chesed has the ability to break down barriers. Chesed has the ability to take sonim, to take people who hated each other, not just weren't friends, they hated each other. And it has the ability to break down those barriers and create ava v'achva, friendship, and real camaraderie between them. That's something so beautiful about chesed. We underestimate sometimes the value of chesed. It's not just, okay, this person needs a favor, let's do it. When I do a favor to that person, it's inevitable that I'm going to have better feelings about him. And the other party is going to have better feelings about me. Sometimes we say, I only want to do, you know why I'm not helping that person? Because I don't like him. Maybe if I helped him, I would like him. And maybe if I help that other party, she, he, whatever it is, they would like me. Chesed has the ability to change hearts and change minds. And it's so important that we remember this, because the relationships and how we feel about others and how they feel about us, to a great degree, is in our hands. We can, I don't want to say manipulate it, but we can have a hand in controlling that. We can change ill feelings. We can change ill will for the better. And let's not say that I'm only going to do kindness for those people I care about. Let's do kindness, and then I will care about that person. And you know what? That person will care about me as well. Chesed is so powerful and it has that ability. I think this medrash drives that lesson home. And it's so important. I've heard so many people talk about this, about how empowering chesed is. And what I hear people say very often about chesed is that it really can make a person feel good. And that's true. But we don't often focus on this. Chesed could change the way I feel about that other party. Is that if I should say to myself, I don't like that person. How could I change this? Start doing chesed. By doing chesed, I'll feel better about the person. Oh, I'm in an argument with that person. I'm upset at my spouse. I'm upset at my sibling. So, but I don't want to be upset. I want to love the person more. What can I do? Do chesed and then I'll love. It's so counterintuitive, but Chazal are telling us that's the way Hashem made us. That's the psychology of a human being. When we act toward, do a kind act towards another person, I will develop a positive feeling towards that other, and that person will develop a more positive feeling towards me. There's something so powerful about chesed. We need to utilize it. I want to share one last source with you. Here's the last source. The last source is as follows. The last source is, this is just incredible because I was looking, I realized I have a book about this at home and I wanted to look this up. Let me tell you a little bit about this book. This book is called Do Unto Others, and it was written close to 30 years ago by Rabbi Dr. Abraham J. Twersky. We all remember Rabbi Twersky. Rabbi Dr. Twersky was a noted psychiatrist. He was an accomplished author. He wrote I saw it, close to 90 books. He died at 90 years old. He wrote 90 books. The man just did not stop. He helped so many people in this world through his private practices, and also he opened centers that would help people with addictions. Jews, non-Jews, the whole world at large, he wanted to help. The man was incredible. The Kiddush Hashem he created, absolutely, absolutely incredible. One of his books, I only found this out when Layla and I, before we moved to town, but when we were still living in Pennsylvania. I don't know how I found this out, but he wrote this book. It was not printed by a Jewish publishing house. The point of this book, it's amazing. Here's this rabbi, he's writing this book called Do Unto Others. The whole book, it's a very easy to read book. I'm holding it in my hands right now. You can order it on Amazon, on eBay. The whole book is 180 pages, and it's all about chesed. And he's writing about how he's seen time and time again the restorative, the reparative power of chesed. How he was dealing with broken people, addicts, people putting their life together. One of the items that he found that was most constructive, that can help people feel better about themselves, pull themselves away from the abyss, away from the edge, and really go out and live meaningful life, was the more they got involved in chesed. And he throughout this book, he writes so many ideas and examples about why being involved in chesed and running to be involved in chesed will help us become better people, improve the relationships in our lives. It's absolutely incredible. Now, here's the real crazy part about this, is that I was looking something up about him, and I realized that Rabbi Dr. Twersky's yortzeit was on Monday. We said that Elaine's mother's yortzeit was yesterday. Yesterday was Chaf. The day before yesterday was Monday, and Monday was Yud Tes Shvat. And Rabbi Twersky passed away 3 years ago on Yud Tes. I'm sorry, 4 years ago on Yud Tes Shvat. Absolutely, absolutely wild. So here it is. This week is Rabbi Twersky's yortzeit, and I want to share something with you in his book about chesed that ties in beautifully with this. Now, this book, as I said, the whole point of this book was to encourage people to do chesed, to be involved in chesed. The name of this article, again, I only brought down the last two paragraphs of it. The name of this article, the article begins on page 23. These are so it's a 3-page article, and it ends on 25. The name of the article is called Danny Thomas's Mitzvah Story. And boom, more Hashgacha Pratis. It has to do with Memphis. And here's the basic story. I've seen Rabbi Dr. Twersky. He had written this up in a couple of different sources. I saw an article. I saw another book where he has this written up. But here it is in this book as well. And he writes that basically he was born into a rabbinic family. His father was the rabbi in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and that's where he grew up. and he had a classic yeshiva education. And he started off his marriage, he started off as his father's assistant. He was assisting his father as the rabbi of his shul in Milwaukee, and he became convinced that he wanted to help as many people as he possibly could. And a series of events caused him to believe that he would be able to be of more help for not just Klal Yisrael, but to the world if he could become a psychiatrist and have a better training along these lines. And that's what he did. As this Hasidic, he was a young Hasidic rabbi. He went to school, went back to school. He went to medical school in Milwaukee. The name of the school that I believe he went to was Marquette. Marquette is a Jesuit university in Milwaukee, and that's where he went. And he writes in this book here that he was a couple years into his studies. I believe he had one final year left in medical school, and he just he couldn't collect the funds. He couldn't get it together. He just did not know how was he going to get out of this, make it through his final year of medical school. And he was in a panic. He's a young father at this point. His wife is home. I believe he writes in the story that she was expecting at the time, and he just has no idea, how am I going to be able to pay for this last year of schooling? And he called home. He said, he would always try to call home at some point during the day to just check on his wife and the kids. How are they doing? So he calls home, let's say it's lunch break, whatever it is. He calls home and his wife says to him, what would you do if I told you, what would you do if you had $4,000 coming your way? And he says, come on, I don't have time for this. I'm frustrated. I don't know how we're paying for this semester for this last year of medical school. Don't bother me with Bubba Mices. And she goes, no, I'm serious. He says, what are you talking about? And she says as follows. Apparently, there was a write-up in a Chicago newspaper. Remember, Milwaukee is just about an hour, 20-minute drive north of Chicago. So there was a write-up in a Chicago newspaper about this novelty that here's this Hasidic rabbi who is in medical school in Milwaukee. He wants to become a psychiatrist. And it mentioned, and it was a little bit of a profile about Rabbi Twersky. And it also mentioned in there that he's having a hard time. He's a young husband, and he's having a hard time. He's a young father. He's having a hard time with his medical tuition. And his wife says, I just received, I don't remember if it was a phone call or a letter. I believe she said it was a phone call from Danny Thomas. And Rabbi Twersky says, remind me, that name sounds familiar. Who's Danny Thomas? She says, well, he's an actor, and he wants to cover this last year of your expenses. Apparently, they were about $4,000 short. So he's sending a check of $4,000, and he couldn't believe this. First of all, Danny Thomas was Christian, and also he was a Lebanese Christian. So he just couldn't believe this. He was a total stranger. They never met. What's going on? Why would he do this? And apparently he had seen the article in the Chicago paper. He was so touched by the story that here is this rabbi who went back to school because he wants to help people, and now he's coming up short $4,000, and he was in a position to help. He wants to invest in Rabbi Twersky. That was basically what happened. He didn't want it as a loan. He wants to give him his money to help him with that last year of tuition. He wanted to invest in Rabbi Twersky and have a chelek, really have a share in all he would do. If that's what this man wants to do, he wants to help as many people as possible. I want in on it. And you can look it up online. I could show you. I should have maybe put on. There are beautiful pictures of him meeting Danny Thomas, the two of them shaking hands. Rabbi Twersky. This is again Rabbi Nissan's great uncle. He was Rabbi Nissan's grandfather's brother. So there's you could see a family resemblance there. Definitely the way he dresses. There is with his long coat and his hat, and he's shaking Danny Thomas's hand. The two of them smiling at one another, and he's thanking him profusely. So that's how he got through medical school. The years go by. And Rabbi Twersky has finished school, and I believe he's writing it's at the beginning of his career, and he's still living in Milwaukee at the time. And he was told, yeah, there he was. He was living in Milwaukee at the time, and he was told that Danny Thomas was traveling around the country. He was raising money for the hospital that he built. And we know the name of that hospital. It's here in Memphis, St. Jude. So he's coming to Milwaukee, and he's going to be having this dinner to raise money for St. Jude. And Rabbi Twersky's invited, and he was given the opportunity to make a presentation to Danny Thomas and basically say how much has been collected here in Milwaukee and give his personal story and thanking them. So I want to read to you. It's not on the sheet. Let me just read to you this paragraph, and then we'll read you these last two paragraphs. He says, this is what's not on the sheet. That evening, I was given the opportunity to make a presentation to Danny Thomas of the pledges we had raised for the charity, which meant so much to him. At this time, I shared with everyone what Danny had done for me. I was embarrassed by my tearfulness and avoided looking out at the group. But finally, as I presented Danny with a gift, I had to look up. And that's when I found many of those in the room weeping, the same tears of gratitude and admiration for this great, kind man. I also gave him a beautiful volume of the Bible with a silver filigree cover inscribed with this verse from Micah, "For what does the Lord God ask of you but to act with kindness, do justice, walk humbly with your God." Now these last two paragraphs. Mitzvahs not only bind us, but also break through barriers, bringing people together as the brothers they should be. Who would think of a less likely combination, a Lebanese Christian and a Hasidic rabbi? A father rejoices when he sees his children acting kindly to each other. Danny and I certainly took pleasure in what we had done for each other, and since we had done what God asks of us, our pleasure was increased manifold by our awareness that we had made our Father happy as well. What beautiful two paragraphs. Absolutely beautiful. But look how well that ties to this Medrash Tanchuma as well. This is what Chesed does. Chesed breaks through barriers. It brings people closer, as brothers should be. And exactly what Rabbi Twersky writes, a father rejoices when he sees his children acting kindly to each other. And we can only imagine, if we act with chesed to others, let's not hold back. Let's not say, I only do chesed for my friends. No. First of all, by doing chesed for someone who's not yet my friend, I'll expand my pool of friends. We all want more friends. None of us want enemies. We don't want anyone conspiring against us. So if we want to, what can we do to change the minds and hearts of an enemy? Act with chesed. If we act chesed, chesed could break through barriers. There's so many ways that chesed is helpful, and this is just one of them. And when we break through those barriers and we reestablish achva and ahava, friendship, camaraderie, love with another Jew, with another member of society, whoever they may be. So then what Rabbi Twersky points out as well, there's nothing a parent loves more than when he sees his children getting along. Not only will that act of chesed break through and create a warmer relationship between me and someone who I was not so fond of until now, but it'll also make HaKadosh Baruch Hu happy, because there's nothing Hashem wants more than to see his children getting along with one another. So if we have a problem with another person, let's solve it. And if we're looking for a way to solve it, here's a very, very easy way to make that happen. Let's start acting with chesed. It might not happen right away. It might take a couple tries, but it's inevitable, the Medrash is telling us, that feelings will be changed. Feelings will be changed on my part and on the recipient's part as well. Maybe we follow through on this great advice that Chazal are giving us in understanding the mitzvah of chesed as it shows up in the Parsha this week. And when we do that, we should increase our friends, minimize our enemies, and most of all, let's give that nachas ruach. Let's make HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Let's give that nachas to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because there's nothing he wants more than to see his children getting along. I'm going to stop the recording.